Hey guys, welcome back to another Muscle University video. My name is Jackson Dutel, and today I'm going to be giving 10 tips on how to get better sleep tonight. So without further ado, let's get right into it. Getting a little ahead of myself. First things first, you gotta get into something a little more comfortable. Alright, now that we've got the proper attire, we can get into the first tip. The first tip might be the most underrated in my opinion, and that's just to have a set sleep schedule. Especially for me, I try and wake up at least around 7 every day, and I try and get to bed around 10 o'clock every night. And from before having a set sleep schedule, I've noticed tons of differences with my energy levels, with my, grogginess when I wake up. It's hard for the brain to release melatonin at the right time if your sleep schedule is very random and not set in stone. So my first tip to you guys is to go to bed at the same time and wake up at the same time. And trust me, your body will thank you. All right, time for tip number 2. And this isn't going to be very popular, I fall victim to it sometimes. I think everyone does. And that's just scrolling. Scrolling on your phone before bed, watching TV while you go to bed. These blue lights really can be detrimental to your sleep, and it really is hard for your brain to turn off whenever you are going to bed after looking at a screen for hours or so before. So tip number 2 is just to turn off those screens at least 30 to 60 minutes before bed. That will give your brain nice time to cool down and, relax before you go to sleep. If you want to come up with something else to do instead of scroll, I suggest journaling or maybe reading a book before bedtime. Tip number 3 is to avoid heavy meals before bed. If you eat a big meal before you go to sleep, then your body's going to be digesting instead of relaxing. So it's nice to have at least 2 to 3 hours before your last meal before you go to bed. Especially if it's dinner, a snack, you might get away with an hour before sleep. But if you're eating a big dinner meal, you definitely want at least 2 to 3 hours to digest that food before you get to bed. And yeah. Tip number 4, guys, is pretty simple. It's just turning down the lights at least an hour before you go to bed. I have this skylight machine that I like to use, and you can see in my room it gets pretty bright. I don't have like a lamp or anything, but I like to come in and plug this in before going to bed, and I can just, it's not too dark, but it gets me in the right mood to go to sleep. For tip number 5, this is my personal favorite tip, and we can take a little field trip to show you what's going on with tip number 5, and that's just getting your room pretty cold. I need a cold room, a cold environment to sleep in, and I've noticed that it helps me a lot. If my room is cold, if I have a window open, if you're overheating, it's very hard to sleep, so keep your room cool. Okay guys, for tip number 6, this is kind of one that I love to live by. If any of you listen to the Andrew Huberman podcast, he has died on this hill, and that's just not consuming any caffeine at least about 4 to 5 hours before bed. And that's because caffeine can stay in your system for 6 to 10 hours after drinking it. Andrew Huberman, who I listen to, he stops drinking caffeine at 2 p.m. And it really varies on what time you go to bed, but you definitely need a solid 4 to 5 hours between your last sip of an energy drink or your last sip of coffee before you hit the hay, before your head lays on the pillow. Tip number 7 is just, having a good nighttime routine. I like to take a shower before I go to bed, brush my teeth, and, even get some stretching in after a long day. If I worked out that day, it's always nice to get a stretch in. And I'll usually put my phone across the room so it's not a distraction for me. I'll set my alarm, and then I'll just be done for the night, and that really gets my brain in the right place to go to sleep. Tip number 8, guys, is to just keep your bed for sleeping only. A lot of times I'll get home and I'll plop down on my bed and I'll scroll reels or do homework in my room on my bed, and it actually makes a big difference if you keep those activities separate. If you could do that on your couch or something and really only keep your bed for sleeping only. If you get under the covers at night and that's the only time you're under the covers, then your brain is instantly gonna turn off. You're gonna be much sleepier. You're not gonna be thinking, I wanna do homework, or I wanna scroll reels, or I wanna, do whatever. If you get in bed, nothing else that morning, nothing else that day, then you'll be out like a light. For tip number 9, it has a lot to do with exercise, and that's just moving your body throughout the day. Maybe going for a run before bed, or making sure that you don't miss a workout that day. If you burn energy through a workout, then you'll be much more tired when you go to sleep. I've really noticed great differences with how sleepy I am after doing a hard exercise that day. The quality of sleep I get is much better after exercising. And, even if you don't have time for a 45-minute to an hour-long workout, you could always go for a 10 to 20-minute run, and that will make a big difference in your sleep life. And that's tip number 9. For the 10th and final tip, it's just going to be a classic brain dump. If you get a journal or a notebook, a lot of times I find myself in bed and I'm thinking about, quite honestly, anything, what's not going well for me, what's going really well for me, what I'm anxious about, what I'm excited about. And I find that it pays off to take a notebook and just write out all my thoughts and all my feelings at the end of the day. And it lets me leave my thoughts in that day, and I don't carry them to the next day. I don't carry them into bed while I'm sleeping, and it really lets me shut my brain off before I go to sleep. And those are the 10 tips I got for you guys. Now we got a little extra bonus content. I'm gonna have my girlfriend try my nightly routine and see what she thinks about it. Okay guys, this is my girlfriend Emma, and she's gonna be doing my nightly routine. She's gonna start out with doing a couple of stretches, so I like to do about 30-second stretches, static stretches, not really any dynamic stretching before I go to bed, but just like this, I do both sides, get loosened up before bed, maybe touch my toes a little bit. Bingo, there we go. I like to do this pretty much every night before I go to bed, and it really gets me in the right mood to go to sleep. Okay, so step 2 of my nightly routine is journaling. And I told her, just write down whatever she's thinking, good things that happened to her that day, bad things, and just get it all out on paper so you're not thinking about it as you're falling asleep. Okay, guys, and for the last part of my nightly routine before I get in bed, I like to turn on some rain noises to really get me calm and hit the hay.
Thanks for watching.